He's from Cooperstown, North Dakota. Been a veterinarian over there for years. After that, he's made a nice round throughout the United States, working both universities as well as the private industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and now we finally got him at NDSU.
And really what I'm trying to do here is just kind of bring you up to speed on something that hasn't happened yet. A lot of times we're reactive instead of being a little proactive. I'm trying to be a little proactive on this topic. And the topic is, what the heck is a VFD? I think it helps for you guys to understand what it is, and I'm also going to make the same attempt on my veterinary colleagues, because a lot of my veterinarians, even though they might know what that acronym means, they really don't know how to implement it yet. And what's really interesting, a week ago I was at the Academy of Veterinary Consultants meeting, and we had Bill Flynn from the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine. And we tried to go through kind of a mock-up of how you would write a veterinary feed directive for a certain situation. He really wasn't very helpful. And he's part of the policy makers. The more we can talk about this and the more we kind of go through this, the better we'll understand it, and perhaps the less chaos there will be. Okay? So, I want to talk about this veterinary feed directive, but I want to start in a little bit different direction, because I think we need to understand why this stuff is happening. And part of the reason for this, why this is happening this way, is kind of encapsulated in what we call the PCAST report. It's the President's Council on Science and Technology. I'm missing that A word in there. Oh, Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. And the topic that they undertook to really study, and what was interesting to me is if you look at the people that are involved in this report, there isn't very many like you and I that are out here trying to make a living in the livestock business and having to use antibiotics when they're necessary. There really wasn't anybody on this whole advisory committee that contributed to this that were involved in that. But here's some of the introduction. I'm not going to go through this whole report. We don't have time. All right, but I wanted you to be aware of some of the pressures that are coming our way. This was interesting. And it pays for us to never forget history, right? Those of us that forget history are doomed to repeat it, is what the saying is. For an American in the 21st century, it's hard to manage the world before antibiotics. At the beginning of the 20th century, as many as 9 women out of every 1,000 who gave birth died from sepsis, which just means they had an overwhelming toxin bacterial infection in the blood. In some cities, as many as 30% of children died before their first birthday. 1 of every 9 people who developed a serious skin infection died from even something as simple as a scrape or an insect bite. Pneumonia killed 30% of those who contracted it. Meningitis, which just means basically a brain infection, killed 70%. Ear infections cause deafness, sore throats. We still talk about strep throat, don't we? Sore throats were not infrequently followed by rheumatic fever and heart failure. Surgical procedures associated with high morbidity and mortality due to infection. Okay? So one of the great developments and accomplishments of technology has been the development of antibiotics, right? We need to be careful how we use them as well, because indeed resistance does develop with their use. Organisms figure out a way to evade our best control procedures. But that's what life was like before antibiotics. Some of these medically important antibiotics, and that's a classification that the FDA and CVM have used to talk about this issue, they're also used in animal agriculture, not only to treat sick animals, but in some cases to promote animal growth and to prevent infection. So I'm just going to stop right here in case I forget to mention it. This business of promoting animal growth, there are some labels, Oriomycin, AS700, they have label claims for a certain dose to feed to animals to help them grow faster. Even from a scientific standpoint, we're not sure how that works. It must have some impact on the antibiotic or on the bacterial population of that animal to help them grow faster, okay, just like ionophores. What I'm saying is this is going away. There will no longer be any label claims to promote growth in animal agriculture, outside of the ionophores, outside of Bovatek and Rumensin. Catalyst is still on the market as well. Okay? So we're going to be able to treat sick animals, and we're still going to be able to use it for control or to prevent infections. So the report says all of these uses promote the development of antibiotic resistance among bacteria and animals. And that's true. The more we use antibiotics, the more resistance we actually can get. Okay? And these resistant strains do, at least in some cases, spread to humans. It's just like I told Ken Morgan this morning, I'm going to tell you right now that the number of cases you can actually document resistant strains from livestock going into humans are extremely rare. I can think of maybe some salmonella cases, treating a salmonella scours case, and somebody goes and eats a sandwich after treating a calf. It does happen. Okay? Cryptosporidiosis is another zoonotic disease not susceptible to bacterial infections. But these things can happen. I would argue that it's much more likely to happen with the family pet than it is with livestock, right? Dogs and cats are treated with antibiotics as well. Skin infections are treated with antibiotics. We don't treat too many skin infections in cattle, okay? So the report goes on to say, while the extent to which antibiotic resistance in animal agriculture contributes to human infections is not known. It's not known. That's true. They're still going to set policy to kind of put more accountability into the system with the idea of reducing the amount of antibiotics used in livestock. It says here, the risk to human health posed by agricultural use of antibiotics are appropriately a matter of very serious concern. So here's part of this PCAST still. We're talking about how it's used to treat, and some are used to promote animal growth. Like I said before, that's going to be gone. Disease prevention in animals is a laudable goal. And so they're not coming out against the use of antibiotics in livestock for the appropriate reasons. Here's one of the things that bothered me just a little bit as I read through this report. They're talking about a surcharge on the cost of each antibiotic, so that it would be paid by you and I, and then it would be dedicated fund to look at how antibiotics contribute to resistance and so on and so forth. And they're talking about an estimate of around $12 billion a year. Okay? That was a little troubling for me. Will this happen? I don't really know. Okay? I just thought it'd be good for you guys to be aware of this. Here's one other statement that bothered me, and this is like 100-some pages. So I've summarized this down as effectively as I can. It says here, if the FDA guidances are ultimately not effective in mitigating the risk of antibiotic resistance associated with antibiotic use in farm animals, FDA should take additional measures to protect human health. Earlier, I told Ken anyway that science is not driving this policy. Policy is driving politics is driving policy, right? So this troubles me kind of a great deal. It's difficult at best to even measure antibiotic resistance. In other words, from its use in livestock to what happens in people. They're going to make this kind of statement if it's not effective. Well, how do you know if it's effective or not if you can't have a way to measure it, right? And that's what that's saying. So there's some things in here that are a little troubling, really are. So this is the VFD, or the Veterinary Feed Directive. Probably the easiest way to remember what this is that let's say that you come in and you have some sick calves. I'm your veterinarian. And I decide that you need to use Draxxin, or you say, I want to get some Draxxin. I, as a veterinarian, in order to make this correct, even within legal terms, have to give you permission. And that's called a prescription. It's like going to your doctor and getting a prescription for antibiotics. It's the same thing in veterinary medicine. So what this is really, and because we're talking about feed additive antibiotics, they've changed the terminology. Instead of calling it a prescription, they call it a veterinary feed directive. So the easiest way to think about that, it's simply a prescription to use an antibiotic in the feed. Are there other things that we use in the feed outside of antibiotics? Yeah, there are. But this doesn't apply to them, basically. And it doesn't apply to ionophores as well, like I said earlier. The Bovatec and the Rumensin. It does apply to Thailand. So why do we use Thailand? It's probably important for us to understand a little bit about why we do some of these things. Why do we use Thailand?
Liver abscesses.
Liver abscesses. Right. So we put a small amount of a macrolide antibiotic. Thailand has been an injectable antibiotic for probably at least 30 years, right? But we can put a little bit of that in the feed, and it actually lowers the level of abscesses that occur in the liver. Why do abscesses occur in the liver? It's because when we push high carbohydrate, high starch diets to cattle, without really good bunk management, we can drive down the pH to a level that it harms the wall of the rumen. And sometimes these bacteria escape and they'll get to the liver and you got to have it. I might just stop here and say, I think we're entering an era in livestock production where the solution isn't always a product. We have to think about what we can do management-wise to reduce the use of these products. So one of the things that you really have to pay close attention to if you're going to stop using Thailand is bunk management. And it may even require sorting of cattle. Can I have the 1,100 pounder in the same pen with a 650 weight calf and then feed the average? It doesn't work very well. You start getting overeating and acidosis and so on. So I think it's important for us to think about how can I solve problems without going for a product. I think we're kind of getting into this era. Right down here, I said these drugs will be used with appropriate veterinary supervision. We used to talk about this in this context with a valid veterinary client-patient relationship. That's called a VCPR. We always like acronyms, don't we? VCPR. This language is actually not in the VFD. They had to take it out. Why do you think that is? I don't want you to think of this in the context of North Dakota and the Northern Plains. I want you to think about this in the context of living in Alabama. Why would they take out that wording right there as it relates to this veterinary feed directive? Think about the number of veterinarians and the relationship to livestock in certain parts of the country. Think there's a lot of veterinarians, food animal-wise, that deal with livestock in Alabama? There's a few, there's not very many. So the reason this is from a pragmatic standpoint, they actually had to remove this because it may not work. You actually can't find a veterinarian who's close enough to that operation, knows what's going on, to give that prescription. It's a little sad, but that's the reality of it. Okay? So this wording is no longer in the VFD. They want to really phase out the use of medically important antimicrobial drugs for production purposes. And initially that's now feed efficiency and rate of gain. That's gone. So the aureomycins that you could use a certain label claim, that's gone. AS700, that label is gone. Not like the antibiotics are going away, just that they've asked the company voluntarily to remove those labels. Are those companies going to do it? Darn right they are. They want to phase in veterinary oversight of therapeutic uses of these drugs, and the goal is ultimately to reduce the use of antimicrobial drugs in animals, with the goal of reducing resistance. What's interesting to me is that the amount of antibiotics that are actually fed in, I'll just put cattle diets, for example, while it seems like a great deal in terms of pounds, because if you treat a 1,000-pound animal, that's like 5 humans, okay? So you got one animal weighs 1,000 pounds, it's going to take a fair amount of antibiotic, right? And there's a significant portion of this when they talk about the use of antimicrobial drugs that is indeed Bovatec and Rumensin. Okay, all feedlot cattle are, unless they're natural or organic, are going to be on Bovatec or Rumensin. So it's somewhere around 35 to 40% of all this antimicrobial drugs is actually Bovatec or Rumensin. If you really think about it, the use of aureomycin, the use of, now Thailand would contribute quite a bit, but aureomycin, AS700, it's pretty insignificant, it really is, in terms of its overall use. So the idea that we're going to reduce the use of antimicrobial drugs with a VFD, it's going to contribute some chaos and confusion up front. There's no doubt in my mind. If I, as a veterinarian, have to write these, it's going to take me some time to do it. I have to know how many animals are involved, to know what we're treating, have to be familiar with it. It's another step in this whole production system. This VFD applies to these medically important drugs, the tetracyclines, the oxytets, the sulfonamides, the Tylenol, the Pulmatil. Nufor actually has a label claim for use in aquaculture. Excluded are Rumensin, Bovatec, and Catalyst. Most milk replacers that you buy today have chlortetracycline in them. They do. Okay? Do we really need chlortetracycline in milk replacers? I don't know the answer to that, actually. But it's on the label and used to treat enteritis, which just means an infection in the intestine, right? So in 2016, December 2016, if you need milk replacer, you'll have to go to your veterinarian and say, you need to write me a VFD. You know, in some respects it's a little crazy. Maybe we have to think again, do I really need it? Can I get milk replacer without CTC? You can, actually. When you go to the local elevator, they've all got CTC in it. So these are the ones that are included. These are medically important drugs on the human side. Okay. So these are some of the labels that currently exist. You can use it to prevent anaplasmosis. The good thing about North Dakota is that I can honestly say I've never seen an anaplasmosis case in North Dakota. What it is, it's a parasite infection of the red blood cells, and it causes cattle to get extremely anemic. They get a little yellow appearance as well. And so in some parts of the United States, they actually have to control this infection by putting CTC in the mineral. That's still okay. And these just gives you an idea of what the doses are. What's interesting is that the dose for less than 700 pounds is 350 milligrams, and the dose here is, significantly higher for cattle greater than 700 pounds. You can also use it to treat E. coli. You can use it to treat Mannheimia hemolytica, these specific pneumonia pathogens. And you can use it even at this high of a dose, 10 milligrams per pound of body weight daily, and feed continuous for 5 days. The dose on LA200 is actually 9 milligrams per pound, so this is a little bit a higher dose. But here's an important point to remember, I think. How much of this drug actually gets into their system compared to injectable oxytetracycline? I don't expect you to know this, but I want to tell you anyway. 10%. It's about 10%. In other words, it falls short by 90%. What's really interesting to me, though, is that it seems to still work. One of the questions we had in our session at the Academy of Veterinary Consultants meeting, because I know this is done, okay, I want to put these cattle on for 5 days. I'm going to take them off a day, and then I want to put them on for 5 more days because I don't think they're completely over what they're dealing with. Can I just create one veterinary feed directive to accomplish that? Basically, the answer was no. You'll have to have your veterinarian write you 2 separate feed directives for using that regimen. It has to be for 5 days. If you want to start after 24 hours, you got to get another one. Having said that, is all of this written in stone like the 10 Commandments? No, it's not. Okay? I suspect it won't be for some time. I even am suspicious that it may not be implemented in December of 2016. I'm not sure we can get all this stuff figured out so that there's a practical solution to this whole thing. Here's for feed efficiency, 25 to 70 milligrams per head per day, 250 to 400 pounds. For growing cattle, it's 70 milligrams per head per day. Here's 350 milligrams per head per day. Here's anaplasmosis. I mean, the dose has been all over the board on this thing for different things. The truth of it is, it's worked too. Even small doses like this. Does somehow this dose actually contribute to antibiotic resistance in the human population where this one doesn't? I don't know. How do you figure that one out? But somebody's got it in their head that somehow does, and thus we have the veterinary feed directive, and thus these dosages are going away. I know that nobody has looked at that question. Does this dose here contribute to antibiotic resistance, and this one doesn't? Okay? Yeah, this is 5 times the dose down here, but it's still a really small dose. Let me back up a slide. That was 350 milligrams per head per day. Okay? If I go here, 10 milligrams per pound, okay, and I've got a 5 weight animal, that's like 5,000 milligrams per head per day, right? So nobody really looked at this question of titrating which contributes to antibiotic resistance and which doesn't. Okay? It's a strange question that they're trying to answer with a big sledgehammer in a way. As far as I can tell you today, this begins December 2016. You need your veterinarian involved, even if you don't like your veterinarian. Are all veterinarians lovable creatures? Yes, they are, actually. So you need your veterinarian involved. And I even recognize that there are certain parts of even North Dakota where there's maybe not a livestock veterinarian around, but you need to find one you can work with and understand that if you want to use these antibiotics and feed medications, you're going to need basically his permission. We're going to have to get the nutritionists on board. We're going to have places that sell aureomycin, the elevators and the feed mills, all on board at the same time. It's a big project. So that's why we're starting early. Milk replaced with antibiotics needs that prescription. There's no labels for growth promotion. It's only for therapy and control. And here's one final one that's really important. Let's say that you have a pink eye outbreak in the pasture. You want to do something. You got 500 steers out there and they got an outbreak going on, and you don't necessarily have can run them all through and give them a long-acting dose of Draxxin to treat pink eye, which would be pretty expensive. So for years we've kind of slipped under the radar and said, well, let's just put a little CTC in the mineral here, and we'll put out the brush fire, keep it down to a smolder, right? There is no extra label drug use provisions with feed-grade antibiotics. There isn't. So I'll be honest with you, I don't know how we're going to deal with this. I think foot rot in the pasture and pink eye in the pasture are animal well-being, animal welfare issues. I really do. And sometimes there's a lot more stress on animals just rounding them up and then treating a whole bunch versus putting something in the mineral. So this is a question that was not addressed last week either. Lots of issues. I want you to be aware of it. December 2016, find your veterinarian, work with him if you need permission to use these antibiotics.